Yeah, I think today we're going to go over some modeling practice. So like just some basic modeling tools, some tricks, some different techniques. Um, like a really basic look at texturing and UV unwrapping if I get to it within the hour. I had a few people ask me about this hat, so I thought a cool challenge could be to model the hat that you see on the screen at the moment. You know, it's always good to have like some of these basic lessons and like basic tools and tricks and stuff kind of wrapped around something that's related to the beast, so that people can kind of apply the logic, you know, to their specific circumstance. So yeah, one of the things I like the most about the beast is like all the ears and stuff. Like there's obviously a huge variety of them. It's kind of cool to have the ears like still part of the overall silhouette
Yeah, definitely.
of the beast, and like obviously depends on the beast, like what ears you've got. So I thought it could be kind of cool to teach through some of the principles, and then like hopefully people can work around some of those principles with their own specific kind of beast, like head setup, and like ear setup, especially for things like the deer, you know, where they've got the antlers like poking through. It's like could be kind of cool to have like little holes and stuff. Going to be going through how to model the sort of hat that you see on the screen here. So some basic modeling kind of tools, some different tricks and techniques that can be applied to any sort of modeling in Blender. A quick look at texturing maybe, if we get time. So, you know, what is UV unwrapping, how to UV unwrap a custom shape that you've built yourself. And thought it could be cool to teach some of those techniques, but apply it to something that you can then fit onto your beast, hopefully, at the end. So in this instance, it's a hat. One of the things that I like the most about the beasts is that they all have unique ear shapes and head shapes. So obviously that will be, you know, your kind of results may vary in ways where some stuff that works for me might not quite work for you. You know, some beasts have different head widths, different ear positions, like front to back, different kind of extremities of ears and things like that. So thought it could be cool to look at keeping the kind of ear and head silhouette of the beasts as undisturbed as possible, whilst also giving them a cool kind of baseball cap in this instance. So I've already done this once for the squirrel mask as a kind of practice thing, but I thought I'd try and do it again on one of the other masks. This probably won't work on every mask from memory. I think like maybe the sheep and the pig probably won't work so well because of just how the ears are kind of lapped to the head. But I'm not exactly sure on that. I can't quite remember what they look like. But things like the cat, this would be a good one for the cat. You can see here that the cat's ears are sort of like further forward than the squirrel ears. They're also a bit kind of thicker in their sort of profile. They're not as like thin as the squirrel ears. This will probably work pretty easily on the robot ears. They're quite small. They're also roughly in the same position as the squirrel ears. The deer, this will also probably work quite well. So thinking about how the antlers could also come through this hat, and then the ears are kind of small and pointy. You know, panda will probably work quite well, but you can see that the head shape of the panda is a little bit wider than the squirrel. So, you know, you'll have to kind of, as we go along, you'll sort of have to tweak it based on whatever your beast might be. So the head width here is quite different. The original one is the original sort of balaclava is probably the most straightforward. So if you have that, you'll probably be in luck. And then I think that might be the last. Oh no, and the hair could be cool also. This could probably work for the hair quite nicely, and means you can still kind of keep the profile, the sort of front view profile and silhouette of the hair, which is probably one of the more unique of the collection. So I've got a few here. I'm not going to be able to do them all. I'm probably going to just pick one. I might just pick the deer just because there could be something interesting to do with the horns there. So I'm going to pick the deer and then I'm going to model a cat. So I'm just going to move just going to move the cap over to the side here. So I'll try and remember to call out all the shortcuts and stuff as I go along, but sometimes it's a little bit difficult. So I'm just going to grab the cap, G to move, X to put it in the X-axis, and I'm just going to move it over here. And I'll just use that as reference for modeling, just so I've got something to kind of follow. Originally, when I did this, I used like just a reference of a hat off Google kind of thing. So you can also do that if you wanted to make something like more like a trucker hat or whatever it might be. Potentially, you could also even use some of the techniques here to modify, you know, some of the caps from the Beast Mart. So the trucker cap with the pins. I think that's a 3D file that you can download. There's also the normal like baseball cap one. So you might be able to use some of the techniques here just to modify those things to fit your specific beast head a little bit better. All right, so we'll get into it. There are a number of ways of building anything really in Blender. So what I'm about to show you isn't like maybe the exhaustive way of building of this thing. This is probably the quickest way and the one that makes the most sense to me, but you know, people's brains work in different ways. So I'm going to Shift A and add. I'm going to add a mesh, and I'm going to come up to UV sphere. That's going to add in a cylinder, a sphere. And then I'm just going to change the values here. So rings is like horizontal divisions on this sphere. So you see if I increase it, it goes smoother. And segments is the sort of vertical divisions on the sphere. So again, if I increase it, it goes smoother. If I decrease it, it's more faceted. Now, anytime you're sort of modeling in this kind of mesh-based, in these mesh-based modeling softwares, you want to try and start with as little polygons as possible. So you want to start with as little faces as possible, and then slowly ratchet up the detail as you need, like as in when you need it. So it's much easier to work on models that have a lower kind of face count than a higher one. It's much easier to edit, it's much easier to streamline, all that kind of stuff. So sorry if you hear the sirens in the background of East London. Cool, yeah, so I'm gonna add a UV sphere. I'm gonna put 20 into both of these boxes. So 20 divisions vertically, 20 divisions horizontally. And that would just give us a nice amount to kind of work with that isn't too overwhelming to start with. So once you click out of that, you'll just be left with this sphere. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to move it up and position it around the head. And then we're just going to press G and Z, move it up in the X-axis. And just to make this a little bit easier to see, I'm going to turn on X-ray mode up here in the top right. So we're now just going to scale this down. So it's more or less the same sort of size as the head of whatever your beast character is. So S to scale, and then just shrink it all the way down till it's more or less covering the head, but it's not kind of super massive and it's not super small. You don't want it within the head, you don't want it super big, you want it just covering the head. Cool, so we've got this. Now obviously we don't need a full sphere to make a hat. So we're just going to click on the sphere and we're going to tab into edit mode. And we're going to delete the bottom half of this sphere. So in order to do this, the quickest way is to turn on X-ray mode. So toggle X-ray mode up here on the right hand side. You want to be actually it doesn't really matter which selection mode you're in, but if you use 1 on the keyboard, 2 on the keyboard, and 3 on the keyboard, you'll cycle through vertex select, edge select, and then face select. You can also click the icons up here in the top left. So if you go into face select, so pressing 3 on the keyboard, you'll know when you're in face select because it will put all these little dots in the center of all the faces. And we just want to delete just above halfway probably, or maybe, yeah. So one sort of segment above halfway is probably about right. And because we've toggled on X-ray mode, when we drag and select this, it will select all the way through all of the mesh. If we didn't have that on, it wouldn't select all the way through the mesh. So once we've got those all selected, we'll just press X to delete, and we'll just delete the faces. So we're kind of left with this, I don't know, this bowl. bowl kind of shape, which looks a little bit funny at the moment. So next, there's a number of different ways to do this. You don't necessarily need to do what I'm doing. You could do it in a different way, but potentially it's the most straightforward is to model this in half. So we know that the cap will be symmetrical about the kind of y-axis. So we don't really need this half of it, or whichever half you choose, whichever half makes the most sense for you. We don't really need one half of it. So we can delete those as well. So if we just do exactly the same thing, select all of them up to the halfway point, press X, and delete the faces. So now we're left with half of a sort of dome shape here. Just turn off X-ray mode so it's a little bit easier to see. Which is looking okay. Obviously this could conform to the head shape a little bit more, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But the first thing to do is to right click and shade smooth, so we're not dealing with those kind of facets. And we need to mirror this over to the right hand side. So if we go over here to the modifiers panel on the right hand side, so the little blue spanner, and add a modifier, we can add a mirror modifier. And that worked pretty neatly automatically. For me, depending on which side you've just deleted, you might have to flip the orientation in which the mirror happens. If you've done anything funky where you've accidentally maybe moved the origin point away from the center of the y-axis, then that might cause you some issues. But hopefully if you've just been following along, that should just work pretty well. So you can see this stuff over here is not actually really here. It's just mirroring the mesh over on the left-hand side. So anything we do on the left-hand side will be automatically mirrored on the right-hand side without needing to do anything else. So another way to do that would be to just keep the full dome as we had before, and you could turn on mesh symmetry up here. So you could enable symmetry around the X axis in this case, so the one going left to right, this red axis, and that would have the same effect. But you know, sometimes it's a little bit finicky. Sometimes you forget that you have this pressed on or off when you're making edits sort of downstream. So I personally find it easier to just model with a mirror modifier, and then afterwards kind of apply that modifier once we've got the shape. Cool, so we've got this kind of bucket over the top of our head. Now we need to kind of make it conform to the head a little bit more and look a little bit more like a cap. So you can see over here on the reference cap, it's a little bit squarer towards the front, it's a bit squarer towards the back. It's kind of angled up also. So like the back here is lower than the sort of top here at the kind of brim of the cap. So we've got a kind of a slope, which we need to add in, and we need to narrow the width over here. So I'll go back over here. There are a number of different ways to do this, but one of the most convenient ways is to use the proportional editing tool. So it's a little bit of a hidden feature and function, and sometimes you might find yourself accidentally enabling it, which causes some issues. But if you go up here onto the top bar next to all the other stuff, there's this little kind of I don't know what you call it, like a target, so like a circle within a circle. The shortcut for this is O, by the way. So O will turn that on and off. So you'll see it highlights blue and then stops being blue. You can also press it, and then the box to the right is connected to this tool, and there's a bunch of different options basically. So depending on if you've used this before, some of this may or may not be sort of selected or changed or whatever, but the one we're going after today is smooth. So if it's not already set to that, then just set it to that. So what the proportional editing tool does, so if I just click off of it and press O or press up here, if I press G and grab this face, you can see it only moves this face. So, you know, we could spend a while here and we could grab all these faces and move them in like closer to the head, and we could also start grabbing in the points and move them in if you wanted to, and all that kind of good stuff. But you'd probably be there for a while. And in the end, the result may not look particularly smooth unless you spend a very long time doing it. So the proportional editing tool allows us to select one face, and then all the other faces will move So once you select the proportional editing tool and then you press a face, I press G to move this, you'll see if I scroll up or down on my mouse wheel, this may be outside of your view if you've kind of scrolled on your mouse wheel previously, but you'll see you get this sort of circle of influence. So you can see the smaller it goes, the more it kind of just directly affects the face here. The larger it goes, the more it starts to pull the corresponding sort of meshes or squares elsewhere. So we want to essentially tuck in our hat from the side. So I'll just move it in from the side with some sort of sphere of influence. You know, it will kind of depend on the shape of your character's head. So if you move it in like this, you know, for me, that's probably somewhere right. And you'll see it's much closer on the side. We could maybe do the same on the back. Just hide this on the hat. We can maybe do the same on the back, sorry, to give it a little bit more shape. So again, this will kind of depend on the shape, the back sort of shape of your character's head. Like some of them are slightly pointier, some of them are slightly rounder. If we just pick this one up here and just G, and then I'll lock it in the y-axis so it can only go front to back, and I'll just give it a little bit of squareness towards the back. And I'll do the same towards the front. So I'll just pick one at the front, press G and Y. Maybe I'll lower the circle of influence a little bit, just give it a touch more shape. And then again, I might just select this vertex up here. So if I press 1, I can toggle into vertex selection mode, press that, and I'll just G and then move that down just a touch. G and then Z will lock it in the Z axis. So something around there is looking a little bit better in terms of the shape on the head. We could get a little bit closer probably, you know, where the brow and the nose is. But I'll tweak that in a little bit. So now that we've got the cap kind of, or the base of the cap kind of conforming more to the head, we need to give it that angle. So the back needs to be lower than the brim of the cap. The brim of the cap at the moment sits probably too low on people's eyes or on the beast's eyes. So again, there are a number of ways of doing this. Potentially the quickest is to just turn off proportional editing. So if you turn off that, we'll press O. Dip into edge select mode, so 2 on the keyboard, and then press Alt and then click, and that will select the entire loop. This entire bottom loop. And make sure you're in a dead sort of side view, so directly looking at the x-axis. Whichever direction kind of depends on which side you deleted in the first place. And probably the quickest way to do this is just to rotate this and move it by eye. So you can press R to just rotate, and it will start to rotate around the origin point of the object, which in our case is there. So maybe we want some sort of angle, like, you know, they're not super extreme, there's something like that. Cool. And now that we've got that, we also want this next segment up to speak a little bit more sympathetically between these two segments. So again, we're just going to Alt, select that entire loop, so Alt and then left click, and then we're just going to rotate. So it's somewhere in between the two. Great. So we've now got a bit of an angle, so the cap is a little bit less kind of over the eyes, but we've still got, you know, all these nice like even mesh, even kind of quads all the way along. So now that we've done that, we can begin to kind of shape this front bit back a little bit better. So again, I'll go into face select mode. So press 3 on the keyboard. I'm going to come to proportional editing. I'm going to just pick one of these things. It doesn't really matter. You can pick the bottom one. Just go into the side view, press G. I'm just going to move that up a little bit and up and closer to the sort of brow of the character. And because I've done that, you'll see it's created a bit of a slope here. If we change the circle of influence, it would drag more of these things. So you might be able to create a smoother kind of the taper up here. If you don't and you have a smaller circle of influence, so somewhere like that, it will affect it more locally, which might be what you want. Depends on the kind of shape of your character's sort of like the front part of their head. So I'm going to pitch it somewhere here. And I might just go into vertex select mode and I'll just move this up slightly and just potentially give that a slightly smoother fall off there. Cool, so now we've got a shape that kind of closely resembles the head of the beast without being an exact sort of replica of it. And we are gonna start to create the brim of the hat. So obviously in a baseball cap, the arc at the front is quite extreme. So in order to create this arc, we're just going to go into the front view mode. You can see it's already a little bit of an arc because of how we've sort of like moved the side view to have like more of an angle. And I'm just going to select one of these points, make sure I've got proportional editing on, press G, and then I'm just going to grab Z, lock it up in the Z axis. Just going to grab and move it up slightly. So we've got even more of an arc. Great. Now, once we've got this, we're going to start extruding the front portion of the cap. So again, there are a number of ways to do this. But potentially the easiest one is to add in a loop cut. So add in another segment, so another set of lines between this one and this one. And the way to do that is to press Ctrl R on the keyboard. This will bring up the loop cut tool. You'll see it kind of snaps to in between the sort of different points and meshes. So we want to just put one right here, so in between there. Once you click, you'll be given the option to kind of move that up or down. And we want to move it downwards. So we want to move it down to somewhere here. So it wants to be close to the edge, no, close to the bottom edge, sorry. But not super close, you know, about the thickness that you would expect from a kind of cap. Now, once we've got this, we've now got a series of faces along the front here. So we're going to extrude these forwards. So we're going to move these faces, or we're going to extrude these faces essentially outwards and away from the face. So I'm just going to select all of these faces. You can shift select in face select mode, so 3 on the keyboard. You can shift select these faces. You can also click one, and if you click one and then you control click another one, it will make a path, the shortest kind of path towards it. So this is quite handy if you want to, I don't know, you know, select a slightly strange shape. You can pick one over here, you can pick one over here, and it will connect them via the shortest route possible and select all of those faces in there. So it's just a quicker way of selecting multiple faces. So we want from here to about here. So the edge of the cap to the middle of the cap. I'm going to go into the side view. Then I'm just going to press E to extrude. And again, it kind of depends on the style of the hat you want to create, like, you know, shorter, the sort of shorter brim on the caps, or whether you want like a longer one. I'm just going to go more or less there. Oh, no, I'm not. What I'm going to do, sorry, yeah, I missed a step. So I'm just going to undo all those. Still got my faces selected. I'm just going to press E, and then I'm going to lock it into the Y axis. So I'm going to come out to maybe about here. So that just extrudes everything straight forwards. So you can see it's looking a lot more hat-like. Potentially, while I've still got these faces selected, I might just want it to not be quite as straight. So I might just want to angle it slightly further up. So I'll press G and then Z. And because I have proportional editing on, it was moving all of those other faces. I don't want that. I just want to move only these faces. So I'll turn proportional editing off. So G and then Z, and just move it up somewhere like that maybe. Potentially that's actually a bit long, so I might just G and then Y and then move it back. G and Z. Again, that's kind of like a personal taste thing. You can do whatever you think looks good. Whatever hat you kind of like to wear and whatever makes sense for your specific beast and the sort of shape of the head. So this is already looking much better. But if we were to try and make this any smoother, we'd run into some problems. So if I press Control 2 on my keyboard, that will add in a modifier. So over here, underneath the mirror, you see that it's added in a subdivision modifier. You can also add in a subdivision modifier using Control 1, Control 3, Control 4, Control 5, whatever, it doesn't matter. All that does is change the initial number in this first box. So that's the amount of subdivisions that you see in the viewport. So crudely, the larger this number, the smoother the object, the smaller the number, the rougher the object. So 2 is usually a good kind of middle ground. Sometimes you don't need it. But in this case, because we've got quite a low poly start point, maybe it makes sense to have 2. If you had a really high poly start point, so maybe you had twice as many faces in this, maybe it would only make sense to subdivide it one time. You know, it would already be pretty smooth without the subdivision modifier. In our case, it's not very smooth with the subdivision modifier. So this is looking pretty good, but you'll notice there's a few things. At the moment, there doesn't feel like there's much of a crease around here. So if you think of a cap, this looks all a bit kind of smooth, like it's kind of running from one point into the other. And you'll also notice it's getting a bit sharp over here. You know, caps have kind of a flat sort of thickness section to them around about here. And this is purely because if we tab back into edit mode, and we just, if I just check this little box here, which is basically the box that decides if it shows the modifier in edit mode. So if you uncheck that, if you had it checked, so if it was blue, you'll have it checked where you can see it applies the subdivision modifier in edit mode and also in viewport mode. Whereas in here, if I untick this square thing with the square corners box over here, you'll see that it doesn't apply it in edit mode, but if I tab back out, it still applies it in the viewport mode. So the issues we're running into where we've got this kind of super soft bit here, we've got this super sharp bit here, we've got a little bit of an uncomfortable sort of junction around here. It's purely because we haven't given Blender enough kind of information about what to do between this edge and this edge. You can see over here we've got all of these edges and all of these vertices, kind of giving Blender enough information about the direction of travel of the surface so that it knows what to do when you ask it to smooth it out. Whereas here, we've not given it any information whatsoever, so it's just kind of making up between here and here. And this is a relatively easy fix. All we need to do is add some loop cuts in. So similar to how we added the loop cut in that gave us this edge, we're going to do that here a couple of times. So Control R to enter into loop cut mode. Just going to add one in the center here. And I'm just going to move it somewhere here, so not quite the halfway point. So you'll see that started to make this surface feel a little bit smoother and the end a little bit less sharp, which is what we want. But we also want to add in more of a crease between the brim of the cap and then the kind of head of the cap. I'm sure there are definitely technical terms if you've designed a hat before, but I haven't made a hat before, so I don't know what the individual bits are called. And we just need to add in another loop cut here. So we need to just tell Blender that there's another line here, and that will give us our crease. So Control R, add in another loop cut here, it will snap to it. And we want to bring that in really close to the this one here without it kind of snapping into the next one. We just want it close enough that if we tab back into viewport mode, you'll see that it's added in a really nice crease. If I was to move this away, you'll see that the sharpness of that crease is more or less depending on how close we go to that edge. So Again, this might be a little bit of a personal preference thing. Some people might prefer a bit of a sharper thing. Some people might prefer a slightly softer look. For now, I'm just going to kind of park it somewhere around here. Cool. So that's kind of solved most of the issues in terms of like the surfacing in this part. If we were being kind of pedantic about it, it might be nice to just add in another loop cut here. So Control R and add one in. In general, you want to try and maintain all the faces to be made of 4 sides and as kind of equally distributed as possible. This just means that if you try and do any animation work later down the line, or if you try to tweak anything down the line, it's all just a little bit more sympathetic, a little bit easier to control. The surfaces tend to be a little bit more, behave a little bit better or more smoothly. And just generally, it's good sort of topology practice and workflow. You know, this doesn't need to be something that you get super obsessive about, especially if you're just kind of starting out, but it's just good to try and keep things as neat as possible. So 4 sides, and also kind of as even a density as possible. So we want to solve the pointiness of the cap. So at the moment you can see it's kind of running to a knife edge, which isn't particularly nice. And again, we just haven't given Blender maybe enough information to tell it what to do with those edges. And there are a number of ways to kind of do this, but what will probably work the best in our instance is just putting a loop cut, so Control R, into the center of this edge, so somewhere here. And once we do that, it sort of evens out the thickness. You'll see if I zoom in and I just drag this up, you'll see it adds in, it kind of brings a crease further up or further down, depending on what you want. You could also bevel this, so if you could press Control B, sorry, you'll see that it would add a bevel. If you scroll on your mouse wheel, it will add more and more loop cuts. We don't necessarily need that, we just need 2. And if we did something like that, you'll see that the brim goes even squarer, which is probably slightly more accurate to real life. But for the sort of softness of the beasts and things like that, you know, they're quite squidgy, they've got lots of soft shapes. Maybe it's nicer just to have the one loop cut through the middle. So Control R through the middle and leave it at that. So you can see the hat's taking shape. It's looking pretty good in general. But you'll notice if I hide the head, just click the head, press H to hide. I'll just hide the face and I'll hide the eyes just for now, and the horns. So you'll see that there's no kind of, it looks like the hat has thickness around the brim, which is great. Like that looks, you know, how we might expect. But the rest of the hat doesn't look like it has any thickness. So, you know, around this edge, this sharp edge here, and the edge on the other side. Obviously, because we're mirroring all of this, we're just doing it on one side and it's replicating it for us on the other side. So we want to just create the illusion of thickness on the hat. And there are a number of ways to do this. You know, you could select all your faces and you could extrude, you know, inwards all of those faces, and that would give you a true thickness to your model, where you create all of the inside surfaces, and you're essentially, in effect, you'd probably be doubling the amount of vertices, the amount of polygons and all that kind of stuff, when it's not really needed, because you don't see any of these faces on the inside of the hat because the head's in the way. So we don't need to create all this extra information. So this will be really good if you want to get this thing into Nifty Island, where you're looking at lower polygon counts and things like that. Just being smart about, you know, how much information makes the model. So how many faces make up the model? You know, in this instance, we don't need all these faces on the inside because you'll never see them. So we don't need to create them, and then we don't need to bog Nifty Island down with it, and our file overall will be just a lighter and also more manageable and easy to edit in the end. So that's one way of doing it. The simplest way, I think, at the moment is to just select this very outer edge. So Alt and then left click, that will select that entire loop, and it will select also the loop that we made, or that we extruded on the hat, sorry, the brim of the hat. And we just want to essentially extrude this inwards. So the easiest way of doing this is to press E to extrude. And we want to extrude, but we don't want to give it any direction. We just want it to extrude an entirely duplicate set of vertices exactly where the original ones are. So we're just going to exit out of this. So you can press escape on the keyboard. We have extruded, even though it doesn't seem like it, we've extruded an entirely duplicate set of edges. It's just they're exactly on top of the previous edges. And from here, we just want to scale them inwards. So we'll press S to scale, so S to scale. You can see scale outwards, or we can scale inwards slightly. And we're just going to scale, we're just going to scale inwards ever so slightly. So something around there, maybe. That kind of feels okay. And at this moment, there's a little problem here at the back here, but we can solve that a little bit later. So we've got some thickness to the hat in terms of the edge. So you'll see if we tab back into out of edit mode, sorry, you'll see that we've got a little bit of thickness. So if we added in back the balaclava, added in back the balaclava, you see it kind of looks like we've got some cap thickness, but we've only kind of extruded an extra, I don't know how many faces that is, like an extra 10 faces, rather than all of the faces that you wouldn't ever see. And if we were being really pedantic about this, you could also then extrude upwards, so E and then Z, where you're extruding just a little bit upwards so that it kind of rounds off the bottom of it a little bit more, as you would expect from a hat. Now, if I just isolate this for a second, so if you ever want to hide everything except for the object that you select, you can press Shift and then H, and that will select, that will hide everything except for the selection. So it's good if things are getting in the way and you just want to focus on this one item. Shift H, and then Alt H will bring everything back, including other stuff in your scene. So just be wary of that. So I just want to Shift H into this. So I've got there. We got a little bit of a problem here. So if I just zoom in on this bit, you'll see that it's created a triangle. So we got a point here, we got a point over here, and we've got two triangles for some reason. It's decided to create that, and we don't want that. We want 4 sides on all of our meshes. So again, there are a couple of ways to solve this. Potentially the quickest one for now is to essentially add in a cut onto this surface and then merge 2 surfaces together to make a 4-sided shape. So the quickest way to do that is to use the knife tool. So press K on the keyboard and it will snap to all of these edges. It will snap to points. If you're on a point, it will snap to an edge and kind of let you move along the edge. We want to select from here, so this point over here, click there, you see it draws this purple line. This purple line, if you move it across other lines, you'll see that it creates these little green squares, and that's just to tell you where it's going to make a split in that line. So each one of those green squares will become a vertex, so it will become a point. So in our instance, we don't want to come down here or do any of that. We want to go all the way over here to the right hand side, and we just want to press somewhere in the middle between these 2 points over here, so somewhere here, and then just press enter once you've done that, and you'll see that's added in a line there, it's added in a point here, and now you'll see we have 1, 2, 3 faces. We have 1 4-sided and we have 2 3-sideds, and we can make these 2 3-sideds into 1 4-sided by just selecting both of them and pressing F to fill. So F to fill. So now we've got now we're back to 2 4-sideds. And if we're being particularly pedantic, we can just bring up this this point here, so it's kind of moving, the surface is moving as you would expect. You'll see if I tab back in, so subdivision mode is on, you can see it just behaves a little bit strangely around here. That's because this edge is diving down from this height to this height. So if we just go into vertex select mode using 1, G, Z, move it up, G, and then Y, and just move it out slightly. So it's exactly where you would kind of expect that point to move if it was moving kind of normally through the surfaces. Cool, so we fixed that little error there. And I'm just going to bring back all of the things that I've just hidden. So I'm going to press Alt and then H, and I'll bring back all the other stuff. So the next thing to do is potentially cut the holes out for the ears, and also in my case, it would be the antlers. So now we've got our hat. You can see we've got a bunch of faces that are quite close to the ears, and these will be the ones that we want to cut out. So in this instance, this will change depending on where your ears are located, like how big the ears are and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it probably makes sense to chop out these 4, or potentially, no, yeah, definitely, okay, makes sense to chop out these 4, potentially just these 3. We could see if we can get away with that. So I'm going to select these 3. I'm just going to press X and then delete the faces. So you'll want to delete the faces that are kind of nearest the ears, and then we're going to start moving some of these points around so that we can kind of better hug the ear. So if I go back over here to my subdivision and I just turn on the ability to turn this to show the subdivision while I'm in edit mode, I'll be able to see the exact shape of this surface whilst I move these points. So you know, for me, I want to be able to select these points, and I'm going to edge slide them along. So rather than just grabbing the point and then kind of moving it, which will potentially look great in one direction, but might have moved it weirdly in another direction. Like it might be all the way down here, and then you'll have a bump in your hat. Or maybe it looks great in the side view, but you realize that actually it's all the way out here. It's easier if you select the vertex and you edge slide along this path that we already have here. So 1 into vertex selection mode, press the vertex, and then you want to press G and then G again. And that will lock it along this yellow line. So this first one, I want to move maybe somewhere here. I'll select the second one, I'll do the same, G, G, G and then G again and move it. These look okay. I might want to move this one slightly closer in the end. This one, G, G, lock it in that way, G and G, and move it down potentially this way. The one that's hidden just behind here, which you can't see me select, but it will let you select, we want to move downwards and outwards. So G and G and move it down, and then G and G and move it kind of out. And maybe we move this one down again. Again, this will kind of change depending on the sort of perimeter of the ear, like the shape of the ear. And these look okay. Maybe I'll move that one slightly inwards. This one slightly inwards also. This one maybe slightly outwards. So G and G, G and G. Potentially we could also move all of this line, so slightly to the left. So rather than the meshes doing this kind of slightly strange sort of zigzag pattern here, we could straighten these out, which would probably be good practice. So I'm going to select this edge using edge select mode in 2, and I'm going to select the one back here, and I'm just going to press Control. Oh, sorry, I'm going to press. I need to be in X-ray mode for this. So if you're in X-ray mode, it will let you select things behind other things. So I'm going to select this one, I'm going to Control, and then I'm going to click and select this one over here. And I'm just going to do the same. So GG. Sorry, I don't need this first one. Sorry, I only need this one down to here. And then GG to sort of edge slide them along. And the same up here, so this one to this one, GG, and down. So now we've got a kind of slightly neat mesh, a slightly neater mesh. We could also do the same with this one, so GG, and have that more of like a smooth arc up there. So we've got this, if I turn effects rate mode, we've got this neat kind of hole. Actually, it's not quite big enough, so I'm just going to drag these two edges down. So shift select both of these, GG, and slide them downwards. So we've got the hole for our ear, and hopefully if the mirror is still working fine, we've got the hole on the other side as well. And we'll do the exact same thing for the horns in this instance, which you'll only have if you're also using the deer. And potentially it makes the most sense to get rid of maybe these four, and then we'll move them down. So select those faces, X, delete the faces, and we'll just move some of these points in. So I'm just going to do this from a top view. So just G, grab them and move them in. This one, GG, and slide that underneath. Maybe this one, I'll slide that down, so GG, G and then G. So we've got a bit more of a sort of circular hole there. GG and move that out. And then that looks okay to me. So we've got holes on the other side there as well. So it's coming along nicely. If we want to add a little bit of thickness into this bit, we can select this entire loop. So 2 into edge select mode, Alt, click, and then select all the edges here. And then we just want to extrude them sort of inwards. So E to extrude the edges, just bring them down slightly inwards towards the cap. So now we've got a little bit of thickness in that kind of edge, so it doesn't feel like it's infinitely thin at those points. So over here, we'll do the exact same thing. So Alt, click the loop that we've just made, and then we'll just E to extrude it inwards ever so slightly. So we've got some thickness to the cap. Great. So this is already looking a lot more like a baseball cap. Now that we've added some thickness everywhere, but there's a few more things we can do to make it look even more baseball cappy. We can add a little, kind of, I don't know what you call them, the little nubbin up here, the kind of little like button that you get at the top of the hat. So we don't need to do that in the mesh of this hat. If we don't want to, we could. Probably the easiest thing to do is just to add a cube. So Shift A, add a mesh, add a cube, G and then Z and move it up. Scale it way down with S, G and then Z, move it down so it's kind of just intersecting into the hat. We'll just press S, scale it up, and then we'll give that a subdivision modifier. So Control 2, right click and shade smooth. So it kind of turns into a little ball without much effort whatsoever. Great, so we've got this little guy up here, this little nubbin, G and then Z. You could also make this as part of this mesh if that was something that you wanted to do as well. You would just kind of extrude up from these faces. So the last and final thing we can probably do to make it look even more cap-like, and again, this will kind of change depending on where your ears are located, and like any other things like the horns in this instance make it a little bit tricky. But caps are made up of panels, so you get like three and five panel caps or 2 panel caps. I'm not exactly sure how many panels are kind of usual, but this will be like the triangular sections that make up a hat. So the easiest way to kind of add those in our case, it's quite difficult to add one. You would usually expect to find one here, so between the kind of nubbin at the top So like probably along this edge, you would probably find one where it kind of meets the brim of the hat, but that's a little bit tricky because we've got other stuff kind of in the way there at the moment. And just for the sake of the tutorial, it's a little bit simpler if we move the panels elsewhere. So I think on trucker caps, they tend to have the panel, like a big panel towards the back and then like another one towards the front. Sometimes there's a seam down the middle as well, down the very center of the hat. But in our instance, it probably makes sense to look at this edge. And we just want to give the impression that this is like two separate pieces of fabric that are joined together. And, you know, we could get really crazy and technical about this. We could split them out as actually separate pieces of fabric and, you know, put in all the correct stitch marks and stuff. But in the end, for what we need, there's a simpler solution. So if we just select this edge, so this is this edge in my case, you might want a different one depending on the style of hat you're going for. So I'm going to Alt select and just select that entire thing. And then I'm going to press Alt and then S. So Alt and then scale. And that will allow me to scale in proportion. Oh, sorry, normally. So you'll see if I drag it all the way in and out, it kind of does this weirdness. And this doesn't do much good if we don't have any data other than just this edge telling Blender what to do. So we just need to give a couple more edges that kind of closely follow this highlighted edge so that when we do scale inwards, there's actually a crease rather than it moving the whole surface as it's moving now. So the easiest way to do this is to probably bevel this edge. So press Ctrl B for bevel, and then just drag out the extra lines. So we can do this in a number of ways. You could do it with two lines. We probably want 3. So if you only see 2 or you see many more, just scroll on your mouse wheel till you find the option with 3. And we're just gonna add in a very sort of shallow or fine kind of distance between all 3 of those edges. And you'll see if we go into sort of out of edit mode, into the viewport mode, you'll see that because we have the subdivision surface modifier on there, because we've given Blender more edges to kind of think about, it's now thinking that there's a crease on this surface, which is half true. But we want the crease, rather than it being kind of an outwards crease, we want it to fold inwards as if it was stitched, as if these 2 panels, so this one and this one over here, were stitched together. So now we've got these 2 edges, we can select the middle one. So Alt and then click the middle one. And we can do what we did earlier. So Alt S, and we'll just bring it in. You could bring it out, which is kind of weird, but bring it in just ever so slightly, somewhere there maybe. And you see that now, or maybe went a bit far. Actually, we don't need to start bringing it in underneath the bottom. You only need to really bring it in on the external faces. So I'll just pick this very bottom one. I'll pick the one all the way at the top, and I'll just Control click through them and it will pick that path for me. Alt and then S, and just scale that in ever so slightly, maybe a little bit more. And there you go. We now have some creases that look like we've got some panel stitching, 2 panels. It's kind of a little bit strange in this scenario. Potentially I might think about adding in a crease down the middle here, or finding a way to kind of run one through here. You could add another loop and do that way. But just for the sake of the tutorial, it kind of makes sense to do this. So yeah, we've got our cap. Just make sure that we apply some of these modifiers. So this will only become an issue maybe if you start animating through some things or start rigging up or whatever, but you know, in effect, we only have half a mesh here and we're modifying it over the other half. So we just want to apply this mirror modifier now that we're kind of happy with the overall shape. So I'll just come over to the mirror modifier, come down to this arrow and hit apply. You'll need to be out of edit mode in order to do this. You can also press Ctrl A. As long as your mouse is over this box and you press Ctrl A, it will apply the modifier that you have there. So Ctrl A will apply the mirror modifier. So if I tab back in to edit mode, you can see that now we've got mesh data over on the right hand side as well as the left hand side. If anyone has any questions, then shoot them in the chat. If not, I'll probably be hanging around the Beast Lounge maybe, if anyone has any specific questions for their kind of Beast Head and things like that. But yeah, hopefully there's a few tips and tricks in there that you learned about modeling, and hopefully I can see some of you guys wearing some of your hats. Thank you guys. Take care.
Yeah. Bye bye.